Welcome back. It is the tragedy that shook Hollywood and indeed the world. Cinematographer Helena Hutchins shot and killed on the set of Rust in October 2021 after Alec Baldwin fired a loaded gun. The actor was charged with involuntary manslaughter in a criminal case that would eventually be dropped.
But last month, a grand jury indicted Baldwin on brand new charges. The actor pleading not guilty again just yesterday. So what's next and what is indeed happening here? We're joined by attorney and former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani live in Los Angeles. Neama, thank you so much for being here. This Baldwin's original charges were dismissed in April 2023. So why were they dropped in the first place?
Well, they were dropped because the prosecution wasn't ready. They came out guns blazing, figuratively, of course. They had a press conference and they said that they were going to put Baldwin away in New Mexico State Prison. Well, Baldwin and his lawyers knew it was a weak case, and they asserted his right to a speedy trial. They said, we're not going to waive time. We're ready to go. So the prosecution realized that they were not ready for the preliminary hearing, which is essentially a mini trial before the trial where a judge has to rule whether there's probable cause to move forward to a jury. The prosecution had to dismiss and refile.
Okay, so talk us through the charges he is now facing.
So instead of going to that preliminary hearing or going to the judge, prosecutors decided to take a different route, and that's going to a grand jury. So you have two ways to get to a felony jury, either preliminary hearing or a grand jury. Well, grand jury in the United States, it's a secret proceeding. There's just the grand jurors present and a court reporter and the prosecution. There's no defendant, there's no defense attorney. So the grand jurors hear a one-sided account of the case. It's much easier to get an indictment or charges. So that's what the prosecution did here. They got a grand jury indictment so they can skip that preliminary hearing and go straight to jury.
So obviously the prosecution have got new evidence that's come to light. What can you tell us about that?
It's not really a whole lot in terms of new evidence. There's that FBI ballistics report that says that Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger. Of course, he famously told ABC's Stephanopoulos during an interview that he didn't pull the trigger, that he merely cocked back the hammer. But the prosecution is going to need some theory of criminal liability, either that Baldwin should have checked the gun or that he shouldn't have pointed it at Helena Hutchins, even if he thought it wasn't loaded or carried blanks. Or the third theory, of course, being that he pulled the trigger, even though he said he didn't.
So at some point, in the way that this is now set up, are we going to see Baldwin take the stand to answer questions over these new charges?
I think he will likely take the stand, and this is why. There's the legal case, of course, but Alec Baldwin also cares about the court of public opinion. I mean, he's an actor. He cares about his career. That's why he has given those interviews and he has given statements. He talked to law enforcement. He's talked to the press. And I wouldn't be surprised if he took the stand in this case. Jurors like celebrities, and Baldwin is a big celebrity here in the United States.
Yeah, and he's been very convincing, when he was on George Stephanopoulos, as you mentioned. So he pled not guilty to these new charges. If he's convicted, let's say this goes to trial, the jury doesn't believe him, he is convicted. What is he facing here sentence-wise?
Well, he's looking at a maximum of only 18 months in prison. And this is why. Previously, prosecutors charged a firearms enhancement that would have carried a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. But the defense was successful in getting that enhancement dismissed because it was applied retroactively. The New Mexico State Legislature passed that law after the Rust shooting. And I think another reason Baldwin is unlikely to get a lot of time, even if he is convicted, is there's another individual involved here, and that's Assistant Director Dave Halls. Dave Halls pled guilty to a no-time misdemeanor. So even if Baldwin is convicted, I think he'll be able to argue to the judge, well, here's someone who's arguably as culpable, if not more. He's the one who famously said that it was a cold gun and said, well, this individual got no time. I deserve the same.
Just on that, there's pleading guilty and sort of pleading down as a way of going about this. Is Baldwin saying not guilty is a safe face, or would have pleading guilty and saying, look, there's a lot of culpabilities here and a lot of mystery about how this happened? Would that have been a smarter way of going about it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of criminal defendants plead guilty, 98% of them here in the United States, because the evidence is strong against them and they can get a lesser sentence. But I think Baldwin has a very strong defense here. He can easily argue that armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, she's more responsible. She's the one whose job it was to maintain these weapons, to make sure they're safe. And SAG and other actors have come forward and said it's not the responsibility of the actors to check these guns to make sure that they're not loaded.
Interesting. Well, separately, family members of Helena Hutchins have filed a number of civil lawsuits against Baldwin. What's the latest there? Are they still active?
Some of the cases are still active, but the most important one is settled. And that's, of course, Matt Hutchins, the surviving spouse of Helena. And after he settled the case, he came out and he said that this is all an accident and that Baldwin shouldn't be prosecuted. Of course, Matt Hutchins did get equity in the movie Rust, and he's now an executive producer there. So he has an incentive, a financial one, to make sure that the case is settled. But he's going to be an important witness for the defense. There are some other civil cases pending by other family members of Helena Hutchins and bystanders, but the most important one, Matt's, has settled.
All right, Neama, Rahmani, we'll leave it there. Fascinating. We'll obviously come back to you when we know more about it. Thanks so much for your time.
Still to come this morning on the show, the search for a mystery Queensland